We just learned how to manipulate the DOM by setting the inner HTML property of an element that we select by ID. Now, this way is perfectly fine, and it doesn't seem too bad if the inner HTML that we're manipulating is relatively straightforward and doesn't have a whole lot of parent and children relationships. But imagine if our inner HTML of our div element, for instance, is a lot more complex. This approach may not be the best way. It can get really clunky and really convoluted very quickly. So let's take this understanding that we have of DOM manipulation and expand on it to learn a few more robust ways of adding and removing and changing elements in our DOM. And the first thing I'm going to do is replace this statement with the following code. First, I'm going to assign this document.getElementById method to my main div variable that I create here. And that way, instead of referring to this statement every time and selecting the element every time, I just store it in this variable. So then I can simply call main_div.innerHTML, and it has the same effect as what I did earlier by calling document.getElementById with this main parameter .innerHTML. So that simplifies it down a little bit. And I'm going to initially start with this main div.innerHTML set to the string that we did in the last example, and we can go to our browser to both verify that it still works properly and check our console to see how it logs differently in our console. So let's go ahead and do that as a smoke test before we start manipulating more complex relationships in our DOM. This is a good sign. It looks like the make of our cars are still showing up as paragraph elements properly. And if we go to inspect our page, we can see what's being printed to the console and figure out what exactly is in our inner HTML both those times. And we'll see that when we go to our console, the first time we print out inner HTML of our main div variable, nothing prints out, and that's because there's nothing in our inner HTML. But when we print it out again after we've appended or after we've set the value of our inner HTML, now it prints out that string that we built in that statement in our JavaScript. So that's really cool to see how the inner HTML that we manipulate in our DOM actually affects our web page, and we can verify that it does so properly by printing it or logging it to the console. And the next thing we're going to do is refactor how we're changing the DOM to be a little bit more concise and a little bit more robust. So let's go back to our text editor to take a look. Now, admittedly, this probably won't feel easier and robust for this example, but it's a nice, simple example to get us started in understanding how to approach DOM manipulation from a little bit better perspective. However, in simple examples like this, it is perfectly okay to use this .innerHTML property from the element that we want to append or change the inner HTML of. But let's go ahead and take a look at another way to do it. And for that, I'm going to go ahead and replace this statement with a few more statements. And what I've done here is created two variables, the car paragraph and the car paragraph text. The car paragraph creates a new element that we want to add to our document object model, and in this case we pass in the parameter, which is just a string containing the letter P, to indicate that that element is going to be a paragraph element. And in our car paragraph text variable, we create a new text node, and that text node is essentially what we're going to want to append or place inside of our paragraph element. And as that parameter, we pass in the make property from our car at index 0 of our cars array. And then we go ahead and append the car paragraph text variable as a child to our car paragraph element, which is that paragraph element. And then we go ahead and append that car paragraph variable to our main div variable. So in essence, what we're doing here is building further down this tree, this document object model that we have by appending additional children. And we repeat this process with our car at index 1. Now, you may be wondering, well, doesn't this violate our do not repeat yourself principle, that dry principle we learned a few videos back? And the answer is that yes, it does. But in the next lesson on control flow in JavaScript, we're going to learn about things called loops that will prevent us from having to repeat all this code. So let's go back to our browser and verify that our page continues to display and our inner HTML continues to contain the elements that we would expect. And for all intents and purposes, it looks like it does. Our elements are still being added properly to the DOM, and our inner HTML verifies that they're being added as paragraph elements. Now we'll note that I didn't include the break element when I refactored this code, but that's okay. We don't really need it in there anyway. We get the gist of what we're trying to do.